Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup. Today is August 22nd, 2025. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-hosts David Brill and Joshua Ashley Klayman. Thank you all for joining us on LinkedIn Live and on X. Our usual disclaimers, obviously, that nothing discussed is any sort of investment or legal advice, and that really what David and Joshua and I are discussing, our own personal opinions, do not necessarily represent the opinions of our firms. Also, if you have questions or comments for David or Joshua, please put them in the chat. We will definitely address them. Another busy week. Josh, I'm going to kick it off. The Gulfstream lands back from Jackson Hole. How was the trip?
It was amazing. I had an amazing time. It was my second time in Wyoming, my first time in Jackson Hole, my first time with the Grand Tetons, I guess. But so I will just say, like, the moment I disembarked the plane and was walking across the tarmac, the sense of awe and scale, because in case those at home don't know, this is the only U.S. major airport that is inside of a national park. So from the beginning, my expectations were set high. And I would say the event, the SALT Wyoming Blockchain Symposium, was unforgettable, unbelievable. I highly recommend it to everyone. And yeah, I think it was fantastic. The level of accessibility of not just market participants, but also key members of regulatory and legislative staff at the federal and state levels.
Yeah.
I mean, unparalleled from what I've seen.
I'll tell you, as the least populated state in the union, it's one of those places where you always want to go to get away, but then there's always a nice event like that, Josh. David, go ahead, Josh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and I learned this, my apologies for not knowing this, everyone, but until I saw Caitlin Long's post, I had not realized that initially, according to her post, I haven't fact checked, but I assume it's correct, that the event was intended or created to troll the Fed meeting in Jackson Hole. And instead, what turned out was two Fed governors actually spoke.
Yep.
And it was really a who's who from the regulatory landscape there. So
yeah. A lot of great thought leadership. And of course, David, one of the things that we talked about a little bit in the virtual green room, and Josh, while you're away, I'll apologize out of the gate for the 417 text messages on our chain that David and I have shared on all things markets. But of course, David, Josh, you alluded to a lot of the thought leadership out there. And this morning, I believe it was 10 a.m. Eastern, David, Fed Chair Powell gave what is arguably his last, I think, speech as chair of the Federal Reserve. And David, I'm just going to say it for those of you watching, David, that David and I have unique perspectives on how news is portrayed. And for the past 24 hours, David, I've listened to inflation is going to be out of control. There's not going to be an interest rate cut. Forget September. Everyone was wrong. And Chair Powell gets up there and says the labor market's probably not as good as we think, and we should be prepared to make changes, which we read as rate cuts. David, September's back on the table. The markets responded in kind, not just equities. I mean, I'm looking at BTC did a nice spike, $3,000 per Bitcoin up in the past few hours. David, why am I always so disappointed in how the news reports and how crypto and the markets respond?
Well, look, I think the Fed has always tried to sort of cloak what they're going to say or signal until they actually signal it.
Yep.
But, Polymarket had a 70%, rate of getting a cut in September. So they, the folks on Polymarket were directionally correct.
Yep.
Look, I think we all realize that this is coming too late. This should have come a couple of months ago, but better late than never. And it's good that they're open to seeing what the data is, especially the revised data is showing. So that's a positive.
Yeah.
Obviously, like the crypto markets and the regular markets really liked it. And I think, yesterday will be the low for several months in the market for both Bitcoin and ETH. I think that we'll see a run on both of them from here.
Interesting, David, just Josh, I wanted to pull you into this. Just in Wyoming, when you look at the thought leadership and the opportunity to have these conversations, I always ask the question, which is, how worried are policymakers about the markets and crypto markets? How much of the conversation there was, oh my God, how do you think BTC will respond to this?
I mean, you mean in Wyoming?
Yeah.
I mean, in personal conversations, I don't recall it actually coming up much other than just noting it. Although people may have been having lots of discussions apart from me about it. What I would say, a couple of just quick things on
Yeah.
what was discussed. For example, this idea, again, another illustration of how Paul Atkins differs from Gary Gensler. He spoke at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium, including, he said, and I quote, "From the SEC's perspective, we will plow forward and on this idea that the token itself is not necessarily the security, and probably not. There are very few in my mind tokens that are securities, but it depends on what's the package around it and how that's being sold." He also said, just in other sorts of remarks, both candidly and more formally, this question about how important is decentralization to these projects, right? Versus how many of them propose decentralization just to avoid being characterized as securities. So very interesting things, but sorry, I didn't mean to derail from the conversation about the.
Those are important points, Josh. Appreciate it. And shout out to David Pope, appreciating the shout out on Wyoming and so on. Wyoming is a wonderful, wonderful state. If you're out there, folks, and you get a chance, reach out to David Pope, one of the real thought leaders in the space. David, Josh, it brings us to David. You kind of softballed it, David Pope. Shout out again to Wyoming issuing the first, the Wyoming stable coin, which is connected with, and I haven't done too much due diligence, forgive me, on multiple L1s. David, Josh, how important are state level stablecoins, and what does that do to the tone and tempo of conversations throughout the country? And David Pope, you're going to have to weigh in by chat, buddy. But David Brill, what are your thoughts?
Look, I think it's great. I love the innovation. I'm very disappointed that I couldn't make it out there, but I will definitely make it out there next year, especially on Josh's recommendation and others who I've heard back from. I mean, I'm going to let Josh take more of this one, but I do think it's important that, we're testing things out on a state level. We're going to see, we obviously have ones that are on a global level, but I think it's just an important development, and Wyoming's really wanting to lead the way on a state level and being at the forefront of innovation.
Josh, weigh in on this, and how much of this do you think pushes, shout out to Michelle Gitlitz and Joseph Cullen, our state friends, we should have the state conversation. How much of this do you think will push other states to get in the stablecoin game?
I mean, I think Wyoming is ahead as always in my mind. I think that we just saw that report or statement, at least by, I believe, Goldman Sachs, talking about the scale expected for the stablecoin industry. I don't want to quote what it was. I will look that up when I have a moment, in just a moment. But this is an exploding space, and I think that Wyoming launching its own stablecoins, I think we're going to see other states probably follow suit. And I think in any event, the state should be really applauded for really leaning in and showing how this can be done.
It's been a hard-fought battle for our friends in Wyoming, given a lot of the work that they've had to do over the past several years. But David, that brings us, I think, arguably to an important topic, and it ties in. When we have the state conversation, we can't avoid the federal conversation. I've been thinking about, Josh, I'd be interested if you had met with some of the bankers that were out at Salt, Wyoming. But David, a lot of the banks are now pushing back on Genius Act, and I think you and I have specific thoughts on that. It makes me wonder, how valid is that pushback? And I wonder what your thoughts are on, will stablecoins disintermediate some of the banks? Banks seem to be worried about losing their franchises, and I don't think that that's exactly the issue, but go ahead.
Well, one thing I want to mention, and that we really can't lose sight of the fact that, the use of stable coins and Goldman, suggesting that we'll see trillions of them, is really important for the US dollar, and will also, cement it being reserve currency. So let's not forget that these are all dollar denominated, and I think that's a very positive thing. So I think, one of the benefits we have there is that if we do see some pushback on some of the regulations regarding Genius Act, is that people need to remember that this is really strong for the dollar, not only for consumers. Really think about, I have to tell you, I was in the airport flying, up to New York. I bought some lunch and I'm getting charged another 3% on top of, lunch, because now the credit card exchange fees are being passed along. So, and we can see my door slamming. They don't like that either. But, all joking aside, this is something that people want. And with regard to the banks, look, it's complicated. I think everybody had a seat at the table when Genius was passed. And so, some people may say the banks are trying to get a second bite at the apple with market structure to try and revise some of the perceived carve out for interest in the stable coins. So it's an interesting dynamic, but I like the stablecoin bill as is, but we'll have to just see how it plays out.
David, and Josh, want to come to you on some of this as well, but shout out again to David Pope. He's put some really good comments. Best things, provides a platform for innovation in the payments area. Absolutely agree with you, David. And so many of our colleagues, particularly in the payment space, have said it's ripe for that level of kind of efficiency and innovation. This way, the state benefits and the platforms benefit from the statutory stability. And look at the history of the ATM. David Pope bringing us back to the history of the ATM. And I had seniors of my family who are now long gone who did not want to use an ATM. But David Pope, really good point. And David Brill, just to add on to that, Josh, let me know what you think. The world is responding to some of this work when we look at what's happening in Wyoming, when we look at Genius at the federal level, when we look at broad stable coins. I think it was yesterday or the day before, EU looking at doing Sol and ETH for their own stable token within the EU to compete. Josh, how important is that conversation in the space?
I mean, which one? Right? And by the way, I would like, as I answer that, I would like to give a shout out to the Wyoming Stable Token Commission and to also Anthony Apollo and many others, and David Pope, right, about this frontier token. I would just say, just touching on that for one more second, one of the things that I believe Anthony Apollo was quoted as talking about was how this stablecoin will help improve government efficiency. So very, very interesting about how that works. But I think, in terms of banks and in terms of other jurisdictions really advancing this, I would just say, stepping back for a second to what you and David were just discussing, I think, yes, we're seeing a lot of pushback on aspects of the Genius Act, Section 16 and various other things. But at the same time, banks are right there in terms of, looking to develop their own. So I think, I think this is an evolving landscape. I think, of course, we have launched forward now with the Genius Act, even though it's not yet effective. We don't yet have the implementing rules and regulations, and, it has a delayed timeline on things. But I think it's launched us really to the fore in the world. And so I think previously, when folks have looked at other, let's say, European legislation that related to stablecoins, it's making them really rethink, the approach in the past. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, Ron. I just realized
you got there. Trust me. And David, Josh, I appreciate it. And one last shout out. And again, we tend not to be a political show directly, but certainly shout out to Governor Gordon. In Wyoming, been working with David Pope and Anthony Apollo and so many of the others, sometimes in very difficult environments coming from the federal government. So it is really great to see the progress out of Wyoming. David Brill, I want to go a little bit deeper on the Genius pushback from the banks, and I spent a little bit of time this morning over a cup of coffee number 2 trying to understand some of the concerns. And there's this constant refrain, David, around Genius allows a loophole. It allows a loophole for interest and yield-bearing instruments leveraging stable tokens that disintermediate or really disadvantage the banks. And the argument being the loophole is, well, it doesn't necessarily say a tangential organization couldn't pay interest. David, are bank concerns overblown in this context?
Boy, that's a loaded question.
Be careful where we go here, David.
This is how I will frame it. I believe that consumers and users of stablecoins should receive interest or rewards, or however they're formulated. Uh, look, historically, people are getting like 0.25% on the deposits or something really small. I know, for instance, Coinbase, if you deposit money on Coinbase and you buy USDC, you get around 4.5%, just as an example. So I am for that personally, and I think that's beneficial to consumers.
Yeah.
Look, the banks have a right to advocate for their position, and I think it will play out. But I think ultimately the banks will probably incorporate stablecoins and offer some of the same interest to their customers. It may not come immediately; it may come in a different form. But I see ultimately that's what the landscape will look like, and my crystal ball's been pretty good, so I'm sticking with that one.
David, appreciate it. Josh, did you want to weigh in on some of that as well? Would love your thoughts.
I mean, I think David Brill's crystal ball is worthy of induction into a lot of halls of fame.
For everyone in the audience, literally the phrase crystal ball we use in the chat that we share, the three of us itself. So this is not for the show. This is a real thing that Josh and I live with, David Brill's crystal ball. David, let's talk about markets a little bit. It's been a bit interesting, and I didn't realize, you and I talked about it this morning. I was looking at some of the charts, both for standard crypto offerings as well as some of the options. It is amazing to me how range bound we've been, relatively speaking, even in the face of BTC highs, call it, I think it was 8 or 10 days ago or so. David, what's the holdback? What's the thing that's making us be stuck in a range?
Well, look, for one thing, the rate cuts are not getting a rate cut. It's been hanging over, people for a while.
Yeah.
I think we also talked about, when we talked about Ethereum, that we have the receipts. We talked about getting close to an all-time high in dollar terms on ETH and then seeing a pullback, and we did. We saw that exactly. So I think this time we are going to push through that. But one thing for folks who are interested in Ethereum, you also need to remember that on a Bitcoin price basis, we are very far away from an all-time high. Ron and I were doing a little research before in the virtual green room, and the all-time high for ETH in Bitcoin terms is about 0.15. And so we are very far away from that. So I do think Ethereum, if we can break to a new all-time high in dollar terms, will be in price discovery, and I think we could see significant positive momentum for Ethereum.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Might be a little, I don't mean this to be controversial. I just mean it to be exploratory.
Now you definitely have to ask it.
I know we've often, for years and years and years, talked about ETH being the silver to the Bitcoin gold, right?
Yep.
And I do track what you're saying in terms of, Bitcoin's all-time high and the correlation, if any.
Yeah.
And certainly in the past, we saw high levels of correlation, which would happen again, right? And we certainly continue to see high levels of correlation with different types of tokens. But I'm wondering, as some of these other contenders have pressed along over the years, what does your crystal ball tell you about whether ETH will remain the silver, or whether some of these other tokens may be competing
for
that same stuff? Sorry if that's controversial. I'm just really honestly curious.
No, I look, Josh, no, I appreciate the question. I suspect David does as well. We've often had the BTC gold, ETH silver conversation for many, many years. David, I'll weigh in first, and I would love you to tell me you agree or disagree. I think I have a bit of a different thesis now, and I think the thesis is that the main use case for BTC is store value, which continues to make it, in the long term, the digital gold argument. And we can have very esoteric philosophy conversations about that. I don't think ETH is the silver to Bitcoin's gold anymore. I think ETH, and I kind of had a contrary opinion a few weeks ago, but I'm looking at some of the work that's happening there, David. ETH is financial markets infrastructure broadly. Not to say it would exclusively be that, but I think very broadly ETH, I think Solana might be part of that, is financial markets infrastructure which has an entirely different valuation methodology associated with it. And we could go deep on that. But David, that's my primary thesis now. I'd love you to tell me you agree, but I would love to hear where I might be wrong.
No, I do agree. And I think the way you described it is well put. And I think there'll be several different major layer one blockchains that are going to be used and be part of the infrastructure going forward. So I agree with the way you think about it. Look, I'm a little partial to ETH. You know, I was able to help get it listed on Gemini back in 2016, and you know, I'm candidly a little partial to it. I'll always will be, full disclosure. But I do think that, you know, and that Peter Thiel article in the journal was also, you know, a nice view of how he thinks about it. But I do think of it as sort of part of the main financial infrastructure of the future. So I agree with you, Ron.
Yeah, and we don't give David enough credit, Josh, for the work he did back in the day. So your bias towards ETH is well understood, my friend. And you know, and again, to your point, it is not. It may not necessarily be ETH, but it seems to have become the focal point of a lot of what's going on. And we should probably at some point in the future get down into the specifics of it, because it's a very different thing when we look at ETH and the token itself and its circulating supply versus something like Bitcoin. But again, a lot of the institutions that we look at in TradFi have been looking at ETH in earnest now lately. Josh, I know you sent me a message that we should be talking about something. Yes, the State Department briefing. We can mention that later. Let's hold on that, and that's what I get for reading and not thinking as I'm reading, Josh.
You know, Ron, I do want to mention one thing, and Josh knows a lot about this too with the banks. The banks have a lot of acquisitions. You know, we have a lot of big mergers. There's a lot of legacy technology that can go back 20, 30, 40 years.
Yep.
So not only, you know, does Ethereum have a use case, you know, outside of specific financial institutions, but I could really see financial institutions implementing some of Ethereum sort of core to help streamline their transactions and to move things forward, because you know, there are definitely some banks with legacy systems that they would want to update, and it's a major undertaking. So I do think in the future we'll see that.
And for the record, I'm not saying that about ETH because it's up over 30% in 30 days, David. I'm very much basing that on use case. David, Josh, as we talk about and we look at, you know, call them the big two, we look at Bitcoin and ETH a lot, Solana sometimes. David, I'm going to ask the question, and Josh, I'd love your thoughts. Is, you know, if we talk about range bound, David, is altcoin season coming? And what is the breakout that makes you think that makes sense? And again, nothing of this is investment advice, but there's a universe of other tokens besides BTC and ETH, and we need to give them a little bit of attention.
Yeah. So my thesis is that if Ethereum on a US dollar basis makes an all-time high and we get into price discovery, that I think a lot of those Ethereum-based altcoins and altcoins in general will start to move. And I think we will get that altcoin rally that we've been looking for. And I think there's like $1 trillion in upside in the total market cap of the crypto ecosystem that we could get from 4 to 5 million. It'll be bumpy along the way, for sure. It always is, but I think we'll see that. And my view is that we'll see it in somewhat short order if we stay above the $4 trillion market cap and Ethereum stays above its all-time high in dollar terms.
So David, are you, and Josh, please weigh in here, are you predicating that on, you know, it seems like a lot of the altcoin attention and the market attention is the ATHs for BTC and ETH. I get it. But is there not an underlying issue? And I'm bringing up, and I mentioned this on yesterday's crypto asset working group meeting, which you chair, when we look at the ETFs that have been delayed until October. My argument is that September might be a little bit bumpy. I'd almost argue about profit taking in September. What happens to the market if Sol or ETH ETFs get approved?
You mean Sol, because we have the ETH.
Sol, sorry, yes, sorry.
Sure. Look.
Only 2 cups of coffee today. Yeah. Go easy, buddy.
The ETFs being approved takes a pool of you know, fiat and puts it in a wrapper that people can access more easily. So I think that would look, a Sol ETF, I think it's not controversial to say that would be bullish for Solana, because that would really give a lot more people access to it. I still think there are a core group of crypto folks who have made a lot of profits in Bitcoin, and some have rotated them into Ethereum, and some of them will take some of their profits and rotate them into altcoins. And this has been sort of the playbook in the past. It's been diluted some because of the meme coins, and some money has gone into meme coins. But ultimately, I'm still a believer that Bitcoin runs, then Ethereum runs, and then we'll see the altcoins run. And then typically, what happens is that we get what's called a blow off top, where we really get our big rise in 1 or 2 days, and then we see a downturn. They call it a blow off top because it gets there very quickly. The candle is very thin, and then you see a sell off. So I suspect that's what's going to happen again.
Josh, I want to ask you, you're stuck seeing all of those messages that David and I share about the markets. And I'm curious from your perspective, nothing in being investment advice. Do you look at BTC and ETH first and then think, hey, I wonder what the other tokens will do? And again, you get clients that come to you looking to do different things, and certainly don't speak to any specifics, but how do you look at market activity?
So how do I look at market activity?
You personally.
Personally, I tend to look at Bitcoin, and then I look at a handful of tokens that I'm especially partial to. If I happen to have done work with them or something similar to David, right? Like, we all have our stuff. I do look, of course, at ETH, but I will say, Ron, and I think this is maybe consistent with both of what you guys were saying earlier, like about use cases versus just thinking of it as silver. I haven't been looking at it as quickly, I'll say, or as frequently as I used to, in part because it used to be that those, as you were saying, Bitcoin and ETH were very, but I will say in deal work by large institutions, I would say I agree with what you were saying about financial market infrastructure and all kinds of other things. Even, in terms of what kinds of assets institutions are willing to take security interests in, it's Bitcoin and ETH, right? And then the others.
Josh, really good point. And you use the phrase use case. David, we're going to go there. And I'm going off script. I don't even think we put it in the original agenda. If I hear DATCO one more time, I'm just going to hang up on any particular call. But I think it's an important conversation. David, are we approaching end game on crypto treasury companies?
I don't think we're reaching the end game, because I still think that there are companies that want to go and use this mechanism to make money. And I know I'm still seeing some in my practice, and I'm sure Josh, by nodding, is seeing some in hers. And I certainly know some of our contemporaries are certainly seeing more.
Yes.
Look, I do think there is a place for DACOs, especially ones where there are no ETFs right now, where people want to have access, and this is a way to give them access. But again, you just have to be really careful on how you value them, and think about why are they trading at a premium to NAV. And like I said before, if they're staking, if they're running validators, there's a good reason why there may be a premium. But just holding in and of itself and trading at a premium, you really have to question why that is.
David, and we can make a BTC treasury argument. We've all watched strategy and the work Michael Saylor has done. We can talk about ETH, and we're beginning to see others. David, what is the, and Josh, please let me know your thoughts as well. What is the ground level of tokens where beyond which you say that token should not be part of a treasury company? Is it simply saying, hey, listen, there shouldn't be meme treasury companies, or is it more complicated than that?
So I'm going to say something that's a little controversial.
Love it.
Ultimately, is it really up to us to make a judgment on that? It's really the market that makes the judgment. And if somebody wants to have this strategy, and it's approved, to be traded, the market will ultimately judge whether that underlying token is a good idea or not. I can tell you personally that, there's a very small subset that I would consider, buying in a wrapper like this. But, part of me, thinks, people should have the opportunity to do this. Where I worry is that we get something where the companies aren't run correctly. And if we see a downturn, that they're forced to sell. So that's my major concern. Obviously, I want everything to be above board and no fraud. But Look, do I think we should have meme treasury companies? It's up to the markets ultimately. If there's a market for a meme treasury company and they're able to, sell shares and it appreciates, the markets have spoken.
I'm with you. Josh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I agree with David about the market testing it. I do think though it's interesting because some of the meme coins have, tracked Bitcoin. So is
Right.
it really that different if that correlation holds, right? Like, is it really that different than, I mean, yes, there are differences, but it's interesting because of the ongoing correlations with Bitcoin,
Mhm.
or at least they seem to be. And I think, at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium, which I will go back to once again, um, Dax Hansen from Perkins led a panel on DATs.
Mm.
And I would say that was a real hot topic during the symposium.
Mm.
Um, People have been saying that DAT is the term like ICO was back in the
No,
day,
God, no.
for better or for worse, right? And this whole thing of, a lot of these treasuries have been, these investments are happening over weekends or just in a matter of days. And I would say like, we've talked about this in our prior,
Yeah.
webcast, but I think the sort of exuberance and not necessarily having time or maybe inclination to do the kind of robust diligence you might want to in a longer time period. I think that's something that is a bit of a parallel with some of what we saw in 2017.
It's a fair point, Josh. David and Josh, I'm going to take it one step further. I agree with you both. People should be able to buy securely and safely the things they want to buy. And again, bad actors should not be part of that equation. But David, I'm going to take it one step further.
Mm.
When we look at memes and we look at some of the alts, you had mentioned wisely a long time ago this idea of social tokens.
Yeah.
I would argue there is a marketplace for social token treasury companies in the future. And I'm getting very esoteric here. We don't need to get into the details. You and I have chatted about this. Is that a too provocative a statement?
No, not at all. I really see that being the future of some of the meme coins.
Yeah.
And really creating these communities for, various, it could be sports teams, it could be, individual stars. I really see that as a wave of the future. And I want to be clear about one thing. I am supportive of treasury companies. Like, I am supportive of new and innovative ways for people to get access to different products.
Yeah.
I just think ultimately the market will speak on to which ones are successful. And I do think that we need to give strategy, Michael Saylor was first. He's been super innovative in the way he's financing the company, and finding ways to get more capital, buy more Bitcoin. So I am supportive of that and the companies. I just think that the market will ultimately speak to which ones are successful and which ones aren't.
Well said, David. Want to do a quick shout out to Steven Rutenberg. Thanks for joining, buddy. Longtime WSBA member, Pulsinelli. Love the discussions, but if Ron's correct, then the value of ETH will soon need to track its utility value. Yes, but the challenge, David, Josh, becomes how do we determine the utility value? I have thoughts for cocktails over at the next happy hour. And Steve Rutenberg, thank you for watching, buddy. Good to see you. Josh, David, obviously in the context of all of this, and we'll continue to talk about some of the markets items. David, I want to start with you, and Josh would love to pull you into this. There's certainly some of the litigation stuff that's happened. I'm not a lawyer, as you both very well know. I just ask dumb legal questions. But David, let's talk about the Roman Storm case, and I think why some people had very different reactions to it. It was 3 counts. I think he was found guilty of the lesser count. David, why was this an important case for the crypto industry?
Well, look, there's been a long-standing view that creators of software, would not be prosecuted, even if the software was used in a malicious way, if the intention of the software developer wasn't for a malicious use, and they didn't somehow aid and abet a malicious use. And this case was really, polarizing because a lot of DeFi is based on code, and the law has been a little bit in the gray on DeFi, and so I think a lot of people felt that if Roman Storm was prosecuted and found guilty on all the charges, that would really hamper development, hamper the ability for DeFi to continue to be innovative, and put individual developers at risk in a way that I don't think anybody foresaw.
Yeah.
So I think that was really important, for the industry. And then for Roman Storm, obviously, this is a big deal for his personal freedom and for, his ability to, conduct, have a profession. So I think that was really important. I want to talk about what, the SEC recently and the DOJ what recently put out, but
Yep.
I'm going to quote it, Josh, but I want to hear your take too.
Oh, you are going to quote
Yeah,
it?
I have a quote.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
So, the DOJ signaled this shift in approach as articulated by Matthew Galati, who's the acting assistant attorney general, in a speech he gave at the American Innovation Project Summit. And while not directly referencing Roman Storm, Galati stated that the DOJ will not pursue charges under 18 U.S.C. 1960 against developers of decentralized software who lack custody or control over user assets and act without ill intent. This suggests a focus on even-handed enforcement, targeting criminal activity rather than penalizing developers for code creation.
And may I add some quotes? Because I had some at the ready too. And
Look
by the
at
way,
you two ready with stuff to read. Go ahead.
Absolutely, Josh.
this took place in Wyoming actually yesterday. So this kind of builds on what David was just saying, but I think I don't know, I love hearing it. I love hearing it from the DOJ. So this is our view is that merely writing code without ill intent is not a crime, said Galliati. Innovating new ways for the economy to store and transmit and value and create wealth without ill intent is not a crime. The criminal division will, however, continue to prosecute those who knowingly commit crimes or who aid and abet the commission of crimes, including fraud, money laundering, and sanctions evasion. And then he also said the department will not use federal criminal statutes to fashion a new regulatory regime over the digital asset industry. The department will not use indictments as a lawmaking tool. The department should not leave innovators guessing as to what could lead to criminal prosecution. And I was reading that they were quoted, those quotes were recapped in a Cointelegraph article,
Yep.
to give credit, that is by Turner Wright.
Josh, David, really good points, and thank you so much for sharing them. And they really do parallel things that the three of us and so many of our members have been speaking about. When you look at the critics of crypto in the long term, it's always been, well, you just want to facilitate illicit activity. You want to help criminals, which has always been a bit of a specious argument. But fraud is fraud. Bad actors are bad actors, and the government should, law enforcement should pursue them. But it doesn't mean it should handcuff innovators in the space very broadly. David, Josh, we're running up on time. There's still a lot of things that we need to cover. Josh, last thoughts on Wyoming, and then you and I have to talk about something we're doing next week in New York City, which I think is very important. But Josh, what was your one big takeaway from Wyoming, aside from the fact that the weather's beautiful?
I think it was just that I will be there next year. Right? Like, it was really that good. And I hope next year to be able to spend more time there and to get to meet more people in person. But it was really great. I don't have any better words than that. There was so much happening and so many, that it was just great.
So for everyone in the audience watching this, when Josh Klayman in the virtual green room tells David and I, you will be there next year, don't doubt that David and I already got flights looked at on the screen. We're with you, Josh. We'll be there next year. David, one more thing on the Roman Storm. I'm sorry if I cut us off a bit earlier, but I know you wanted to raise one other issue.
So I think the 10 Bitcoin question is, will the DOJ vacate the Samurai Wallet plea after their statement on the developers of code? I am really interested to see how that plays out.
You see David with the big, Daddy Warbucks 10 Bitcoin wager on whether or not that plays out. Josh, did you catch that?
He didn't say which way it was going to go.
No, it was more instead of Ron the $64,000 question like we used to say when we were younger. So now it's the 10 Bitcoin question.
Oh, so true. David, Josh, thanks so much. Josh, you and I have a meeting next week. David will be there. with us. I'm happy to mention it to the group here. So we have the privilege of speaking with some colleagues. The United States State Department Foreign Press Office is inviting reporters and journalists from overseas to really learn, particularly some of the legal and regulatory issues that have happened in the States and how it affects or impacts the global crypto industry. Josh, we have to do a prep for it on Monday. You and I will be chatting with some other colleagues and David. But Josh, what are your thoughts on how this looks overseas? What are the important things that have happened that you think we need to really hit home?
I mean, I think we need to hit home. Well, a lot of things. I mean, so many things have happened. I think people overseas, not all of them, and certainly not those deep in our industry, but
Yeah.
I think overseas, it's hard to, even here, it's hard to grasp all of the changes that have come at once. I think overseas people were so used to you know, the approach kind of personal or personified by Gary Gensler, right? If we apply that to like all matter of regulators. And I think when we go through and we see we've got the Genius Act, we have this other, market structure legislation in the works. We have, the president's working group's report of recommendations, all these sorts of things, trying to make sense of this for the rest of the world is really
Yeah.
important because yeah, I mean it can't be overemphasized how much things have shifted. And I think one of the really cool things about this State Department effort is to get accurate reporting,
Yeah.
non-journalists.
Josh, I'm really looking forward to it. David, what do you think are some of the important things? And I want to build on what Josh mentioned a little bit. I think it was in the news yesterday. EU President Lagarde apparently a lot of the EU was shocked that Genius passed, for example, David, that US is moving as forward as fast as it is. Thoughts?
So first of all, I'm really looking forward to hearing both of you speak on it. And I think it's a really important conversation to be had. I think we also have to remember that the way our government works, both with federal authority and state authority and the way the agencies work, for an outsider that's not familiar with how our government works or how our regulations work, this is really important. It's really difficult. I know that I've had clients who, before some of the fintechs have been applying for bank charters now, would say to me, well, why can't I just get a federal license? Why do I have to deal with all
Right.
states? And so I think this could be part of a really good way to inform the world and get, accurate reporting on all the gains that we've made over the last, 18 months.
Yeah.
And I think also that I don't know that people in other jurisdictions fully appreciate like the role of the SEC and the change in administration leading to a new head of the SEC that is taking a 180-degree turn from where it was previously, and that may not be familiar to people in other countries and how their laws and how their government works. So I think this is a really important thing you're both doing, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak about it.
Thank you,
Hopefully
David.
we'll be channeling you, David.
Yes, unfortunately, I can't join you this time, but hopefully another time I'll be able to.
David, just so you're aware, there's a legitimate chance either Josh or I are going to point to you somewhere in the audience as we raise points. And I'm wagering that the crystal ball comment will come up as well. But David, Josh, I think it's a really important conversation. So grateful to be part of it with you. And again, Josh, for everyone in the audience, Josh always brings my etiquette up to better standards. Shout out to our friends at Crowell & Mooring, Hudson Yards will be hosting us. Carlton Green from Crowell will be joining us on the panel in this session as well. Really looking forward to that. We didn't even cover some of the other stuff we wanted to cover. Certainly the SEC Crypto Task Force has hit the road. I'm still catching up on articles from late yesterday. CFTC is now doing work in this space. Josh, let's start with you. What are some of the things you'll be focusing on next week now that you're back in town?
So next week I will be back in town and then out of town.
Oh, shocker.
I'm going to immediately following our briefing, I'll be going to Mexico for a stablecoin conference. So I'm just going to do a quick turnaround though. But other than that, focusing on work and a lot of other things. Also, frankly, getting ready for back to school.
Ah, yes.
What about you, Ron?
David sent his child to school already, so he's.
Trust me, we FaceTime all the time. It's an ongoing process, but I'm just so grateful that she's like in college. And I will say this: Amazon will be in the profit. Here's a prediction that I will make: Amazon will have good earnings this quarter because my family did plenty of damage with Amazon getting her ready for school.
David, Josh, I like you. I'm keeping busy with a lot of the stuff we've got going. We've got new members joining. We've got our session press briefing next week. Josh and I'm actually thinking forward already. Josh, we've got our September gathering with our friends at Global Legal Group in London. Josh and I will be speaking there along with several other colleagues, which is looking really interesting. And for everyone in the audience, October 23rd, the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto and Blockchain Summit in New York City. David Brill, Josh Klayman, myself, and so many members on stage live and in 3D. We do have a block of tickets open for non-members. Obviously, it's going to be a room full of members from different demographics and different verticals as well. But reach out to us, info@wsba.co. The website will be updated today with the latest links for the public. I hope you can join us. Everyone, thank you so much. Shout out to David Pope. Shout out to Stephen Rubenberg. Shout out to Carlton Green. All of our colleagues. Josh, David, great to see you both. We will be back next week. Josh, if you're not back from Mexico by Friday, make sure there's internet on the plane.
100%.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.